Okay, so last time I explained all the loose ends that happen in Earthbound. If you haven't seen the first half yet, click here and check out that first. This part may not make any sense without using that info in the first video as a reference. If you do want to start here, know that we will be referencing the first part of the theory and minor spots in Earthbound. This time around, it's mostly Mother 3. Okay, we gotcha? Cool. So Porky just witnessed Gygas get defeated, or skipped out a moment before he collapsed, and willingly left his former best friend to begin a new timeline. Again, to recap, since Gygas was defeated before Buzz made his trip to tell Ness of the prophecy, Ness never begins his quest, meaning that ultimately nothing that happens in the game of Earthbound takes place. And since Porky's physical body went 10 years into the future, whereas Ness and friends' souls went, and Porky left the Earthbound dimension before Gygas was defeated, when the Earthbound timeline refreshes, Porky is able to escape the new timeline, and the one that Ness is now part of will only involve past memories of Porky. He has wiped himself off the plane in time from that moment on. Man, thank God for visual aids. Anyway, Porky kidnapped Dr. and Donuts and took off to another era or dimension. Now let me throw some science into the mix and explain how time travel would be possible. A lot of people have heard of the fourth dimension, and when asked what it is, simply say that the fourth dimension is time, and then grin brightly and strike a pose. But what does that mean exactly? Frankly, I didn't know what it meant until I researched it too, so I too was guilty of the grin and pose. The fourth dimension is time, but in correlation with the three fields appearing throughout the line of time. I'll show you an example. Say you come up against a wall blocking your path. It's too high to climb and too long to go around. If you travel along the fourth dimension, however, which is time, then you can move to a time on that fourth dimensional plane where that wall didn't exist. Walk to where the opposite side would eventually be, and then move back along the fourth dimensional plane, standing in that same three-dimensional space, and when you return to the start point, you will be on the other side of the wall. The fifth dimension is simplified in a lot of sci-fi movies as being alternative universes, fourth dimensions that lay in the right angle to our fourth dimension. Think of it like in Back to the Future. When Biff gets the almanac and Doc shows how the timelines have skewed, those would be two parallel sets of fourth dimensions if both 1985 scenarios were happening at the same time, oblivious to each other. Rick and Morty is all about time traveling across the fifth and fourth dimensions as well. So to explain what Porky has been doing, he left the time of the Gygas battle, traveled along the fourth dimension back to the time past when Ness and his crew loaded their souls into the phase distorter, past before all the occurrences happened in the Earthbound game, and to the night of the meteor crash. He plants the letter to Ness with Picky, then travels to Winners, kidnaps Dr. and Donuts, and travels along the fifth dimension away from the Earthbound dimension, looking for more opportunities for power. And to clarify, if Porky was to go back to the Earthbound dimension, he would cease to exist because his physical form left the timeline before the loop reset. So if he dropped by to see his family or Ness, it would put a tear in the time-space continuum and collapse the universe. Not a pleasant experience. So Porky is forced to find another dimension to which reside. Eventually, and I will use that term very loose for now, Porky ends up in the Nowhere Islands. And this is why I think he ends up there. First off, from the day we meet Porky until he leaves the Gygas battle, he is always hungry for power. It starts off as an innocent power over his peers with his silver tongue and quick talk, and escalates to his cult interaction and comes to a head when he is side by side with the most powerful thing ever, a thing that is referred to as fear itself. He then forces this all-powerful being to collapse in on itself and takes off across a plane of space-time for dimensions unknown. So Porky has undoubtedly developed a bigger ego since we've seen him last. Now, the Nowhere Islands are called peaceful and innocent on more than one occasion, and nothing is more enticing to a mastermind of evil than those two attributes. He lands there, establishes his pork army, and begins to play God, experimenting on animals, creating hybrids, and killing people willy-nilly along the way. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's understand his motive for the pork army and his behavior on these islands. It's never revealed if the pork army is people or like Star Wars drones or robots of some kind, so for giggles, we'll just assume they are people that Porky has brainwashed into following him. Porky established a new pork city, declares himself king of the islands, and surrounds himself with things that only a child would enjoy being surrounded by. We are often told on some locations that he still retains the mind of a child. He wants an arcade, an amusement park, a giant treehouse, a movie theater, and some of the only attractions in the city. No hospital, no bank, no grocery store, just fun things. He is still a child because he hasn't aged, because time isn't the same for him. He is above time, essentially. One of his big quotes states, "I've gone through time and space so many times I haven't aged like a normal person. Who knows? I might be 1,000 years old, or even 10,000 years old. But despite that, I am still the same kid at heart." Isn't that funny? Now, he isn't 1,000 or 10,000 years old, like he says he is. That is for sure. So stop thinking that is ridiculous. That's like the only thing taken literally from Mother 3 that I've seen collectively. And it's the most ridiculous thing to hitch your horse to. So stop that. Just drop it. In saying that, he means that since he has traveled across so many planes of existence along the fifth dimension to a place, and then along that place's fourth dimension, that 5,000 years into the future could happen in a matter of seconds for him. Time to him is as unreal as the word moment is to us. It's all relevant. So he spent a lot of time wandering through space and time and finally found an island that was under-established, easy to manipulate, and a place that he could set up things and just play God until he ran out of fun. But like any kid, he becomes homesick. Even Ness gets homesick during Earthbound, and Porky sure isn't immune. Unfortunately for Porky, he will never be able to see his parents or friends again, due to the closed Earthbound time loop that we talked about earlier. So he makes up for that fact by surrounding himself in things that remind him of home. He names his army the Pork Army after his name, but designs their look off of what his mother used to call him. She directly asks Ness if you're looking for my pig son, and that he wandered around, wording it wander rather than walking, implying more of an animal sense than boy. I'm guessing Porky was often referred to as a pig by his mother, and since Porky was such a narcissist, I'm sure he didn't take it negatively, more like a pet name, pun intended. Plus, I previously stated that Itoy himself said that Ness was Porky's only friend. Ness wasn't one of a name caller, I can presume, so Porky would have only heard himself be called a piggy from his mother. So he models the pig soldiers after his likeness and nickname, created an entire restaurant waitresses that were modeled after his mother, but that still wasn't enough. He created a giant tower, one that he keeps expanding on, adding one ridiculous floor after the next. There's more. He knows his new world doesn't feel like home, so he has to create items that remind him of home, so he creates replicas of items from the Earthbound universe. The following is a list of items that appear both in Earthbound and Mother 3. The teddy bear in the nursery room, the jukebox in the nursery room, the theme from the general store playbowl in the jukebox in the nursery room, the sarcophagus in the nursery room, Ness's yo-yo in the machine in the nursery room, the rejuvenation machine, waitresses in the New Pork City's Porky's mom. One waitress refers to Dung Beetle, as a reference to Buzz Buzz. There's a magazine article found by Lucas and Boney in the storage room. It's the same as in the purchasable house in Earthbound. There's a Franklin badge. In the theater, there is a picture of Jeff, the monkey, and Tessie, Ness, Paula, Jeff, the circus tent, Ness, Paula, Jeff, Master Belch, Ness alone, giving the peace sign to Foresight, Jeff, Ness, Paula, Pooh, Media Crater, Ness, Paul, and Dungeon Man, Ness with two Mr. Saturns, and then the boat trip, towards the very end of the game, we see Tessie, a taxi cab, a payphone, home phone, magic ant phone, flying saucer, eraser, pencil eraser, helicopter pre-crash, the Dungeon Man, city bus, ATM, submarine, Ness's bike, phase distorter pre-crash, Pokey's old mecha suit, and there's that contact too, I think, in there. I forgot on my list here, but I think there's a contact. Okay, whatever. Okay, so I saw this list and I had some serious questions regarding some items. So let me narrow the list down. These are the items that he would have seen without any further explanation, on the street, in magazines, in passing, etc. Now the remaining items, the photo of Jeff, Monkey, and Tessie, the photo of Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Master Belch, Tessie by herself in the Moat Museum, Magic Ant Phone, the eraser, the pencil eraser, the Dungeon Man, and the submarine. These items we have to go a bit more in depth with, and they actually help prove my theory to this point. Both the photo in the theater with Jeff, Monkey, and Tessie and the pencil eraser are visible in photos taken by the Fuzzy Pickler in Earthbound, meaning that there is some kind of physical evidence it happened. So let's get rid of those. Of the ones remaining, Tessie may have had other photos taken of her. Heck, there was so many people on the shoreline with binoculars, one of them must have seen something, so we'll knock that out too. The two that really aren't that important either way are Dungeon Man and Submarine. Originally, I had argued that the submarine launched from inside Dungeon Man, presumably after Porky's helicopter crashed in deep darkness, so there would be no way for him to see it, but there probably wasn't just one submarine in the Earthbound world. So the submarine's place in the museum was similar to that of the taxicab or the ATM, just an item, whatever. And though he didn't come in contact with the Dungeon Man, if Porky was flying overhead in a helicopter, it must have grabbed his eye as being something extraordinary. So knock those two out. That leaves only 3 items. The photo of Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Master Belch, the Magic Ant Phone, and the eraser. I honestly don't have anything for the picture. It makes no sense. There was never a photo taken. There was no way, while flying overhead, Porky could have seen a hidden base behind a waterfall. No answer for the photo. Turn the video off. I'm incompetent. Turn it off. Turn the video off. Turn it off. Okay, you still there? Good. Before we forget about that one, remember the photo where Ness is alone in Foresight from the theater? Well, the actual photo taken by the Fuzzy Pickle guy contains Ness, Jeff, and Paula. I can write off the Belch photo as an altered version of something Porky heard about. Maybe he was intrigued by the thought of his buddy fighting a burp. No clue. But I'm okay with that. So that leaves me to explain 2 remaining items. Are you nervous about that? Think I'm going to cheap out, not be able to give you good enough reason for their existence? Well, think again. First, we'll talk about the eraser. The eraser is a special item that Apple Kid makes for Ness. When he touches it to a giant eraser statue, the statue disappears. He uses it in the Stonehenge base to gain access to the cave. But how would Porky ever have seen it? Well, if you remember back to part 1 of my theory when I talk about how the Starman kidnapped Porky, his knowledge of the eraser makes this entire scenario fact. It has to. Apple Kid calls Ness on his portable phone and tells him about his new invention, the eraser, just moments before he is kidnapped by the Starman and taken to the Stonehenge base. space. The only possible way that Porky would have been able to know of the Eraser's existence was if he in fact was with those starmen at the time of the kidnapping. There is no other way of cheating around this artifact being in the museum. It wasn't something that anyone would have photographed. It appeared and disappeared in a matter of minutes, but Porky would have retained it in his memory, some weird invention unlike anything else. So that's that one. Now there's one last item, the one that took the most digging. The Magicant phone. Magicant is a realm that is thought to be contained inside Ness's subconscious. Once he visits all 8 sanctuary spots, he loses consciousness and is transported to it. So how could it be possible for someone else to see a phone designed from someone else's subconscious? Well, simple enough. It's not a subconscious at all, but another dimension. It's even stated in the game. Magicant is the realm of the mind. Not a mind, singular, but the mind. Magicant is a dimension that has countless variations. It projects a universe of what's inside the mind of the person that's part of it. Porky was present in Ness's Magicant, stating that he wishes the two of them could stay best friends forever. It also contains so many other people and characters, which we could assume would be unique for each person who enters the realm. Now let's bring it back to facts. The only character that's new to the world of Magicant is the Flying Men. And I believe they exist in every variation of Magicant, and they are, to an extent, the way that the Magicant helps us find our way. Much like the Flying Men help us overcome the enemies there. And they have a very strange connection that links the realm of Magicant to that of Mother 3. The song from Earthbound that you hear in the Flying Man's house is a song entitled The Jolly Flying Men, which is a good title. The song actually has lyrics, even though we don't hear them in the game. One of which lyrics from the song is, "Life is but a moment, a worthless grain of sand." Though one could stop and correlate the metaphor between Porky's time travel and his ironic state, the lyrics connect deeper. There is an enemy in Mother 3 called the Negative Man who recites the same line as you fight him. A character that is nothing but sadness and, well, negative. He is the connection of the worlds. The Negative Man's experience with Magicant left him at a permanent recital of this line, and that is clearly weighing on him. That at least proves that it's more than just Ness's subconscious, but a physical dimension that others can travel to. It's fitting to say that the Negative Man also references the worthless protoplasm, an enemy that appears in the first Dungeon Man as well as the Forsyth department store. That would make the Negative Man's reference cross 3 dimensions: Mother 3, Magicant, Earthbound proper. That concludes the connections of the game and Porky's motivation for the army and how he ended up at the Nowhere Islands. But what about the end? What happens at the end of Mother 3? Well, this is my complete theory. I think that Porky was traveling across the 4th and 5th dimensions. He was, ever so slightly, tearing the space-time continuum. When he arrives at the islands and settles in, I think that's what started the needle countdown. The reason this dimension was so fragile and originally kept so unappealing was to mask the fact that it could lead the universe to reset. But now that Porky went and overloaded the island, he sparked the beginning of the end. We see that Dr. and Donuts and Mr. Saturn, who was just another Mr. Saturn from this dimension, not the original dimension, admit that they feel horrible to having assisted Porky all this time and construct a fail-safe device that they know will stop him in his tracks. Now, the final battle is eerie if you look at it with the knowledge that you have now. Porky is exhausted. The time since the Earthbound timeline is lost. It's been at least 3 years since Porky has been rooted in the Nowhere Islands, and he's exhausted. He has mentioned how he's still a child at heart, but appears to be old and haggard. Though he hasn't aged much, that's important to remember. He has reached his breaking point mentally and physically, unable to put much effort in. He plays with Lucas and friends as they ascend the tower, but it's a moot point because he knows that it's all going to come to an end soon. During the final battle, he talks about himself in the third person. Now do you see? Now do you understand the sadness Master Porky bears now that he's godlike? He witnessed what Gygus went through. He knows that you can only get so powerful before you get burned, and he's ready to let go. So he climbs, which is important, climbs into the absolute safe capsule, never to be harmed. But of course we know the catch, the protected one can never be released. But you're all smarter than that now, because you know all about the 4th dimension. He can move along the 4th dimension to the time where the absolute safe capsule didn't exist, and move outside of the spot, and then continue his journey. Because, after all, he climbed inside. He didn't attach himself to it. He's separate from it. Though he can't escape, he won't do it. He's given up. He's excited to see how the universe resets itself. It even hints at his happiness in the very last second of the game, when you're bumbling in the dark. As Porky's Pig Army music plays, he seems to be excited what's next. Maybe he'll see Ness again after all. So, what do you think of the theory? I sure put a lot of time into it. I actually had to read on top of actually playing the games. I almost hit a breaking point. But if you did like it, click like at the bottom so I know. And go ahead and slap that subscribe button just for funsies. And if you're interested, check out my other Earthbound theory. That theory is entirely philosophical and about how Earthbound affects us personally. So it's just a lot less thinking and a lot more self-reflection. Thanks again, guys. Later days.